Okay, we are here today with, I am here today with Shad Imam. Shad and I have known each other for over 25 years now. We
Yep.
went to the same high school, and Shad was graduated the year before me and was the valedictorian, right? You were the valedictorian in the class?
And you're going way back into the past. Yes.
Yeah, but you
Yes, I
were,
was.
right?
I was. It's true. Right?
Well, that sounds impressive, but keep in mind we went to a one-room schoolhouse with 15 total students.
Yeah. It
No,
was
we
really,
went to.
it's just me and my younger brother, really,
Yeah,
just,
no, it was a very big high school, and he outcompeted lots of people. So, and then actually, Shad and I, we worked together briefly at Best Buy when we were quite a bit
yeah.
younger than we are now. So, anyways, we've known each other for a long time, and Shad, in fact, when I very briefly did a podcast, Shad was one of the. I think you were my first guest of the
I,
podcast.
I think I might have been. You're right.
Yeah, you were the first guest. We had to do a two-parter because it was such an intense conversation. Um, so anyways, we've known each other for a long time, and as it became a little bit more clear with Diamond Tree what we were trying to do in terms of the type of people we're trying to profile, Shad was actually one of the first people to come to mind, as just someone who's very diligent and really cares about getting, I would think, I've never worked for him, but I would think he'd actually genuinely care about the people working for him, cares about doing a really good job, but is not very ego driven. So I thought you'd be a great person to start talking to be one of the first ones to talk to, and I guess we'll find out.
We'll see how this goes, Pete. I may not get invited back. So,
But so just real quick in terms of Shad's career. Well, actually, why don't you just you don't have to go through your life story, but just kind of give a
sure.
quick introduction of your transition, the overview of kind of from Oracle to where you are now with Salesforce and everything.
Yeah, it sounds great. So number one, Pete, thanks for having me here. I'm not
Yeah.
sure who all is listening, but hopefully they'll get something out of this. Yeah, I started off my career kind of as a consultant. I live I'm right outside Washington D.C., where we grew up in Virginia,
Mhm.
and like a lot of guys out of college, I started my career as a general consultant. Got into Oracle and databases pretty early on the technology side, and did that for about 8 years before realizing that, hey, my passion seems to be really in more of the mentorship and kind of bringing people into the organization and how to cultivate them and grow them. And I had an opportunity afforded to me about, hey, are you interested in leadership, taking on kind of this, at the time I'm in pre-sales, so it was a pre-sales manager type of position. um, it was a rigorous process, as it always is, to kind of go through the interview. And I had not at that point interviewed in 7 or 8 years because I've been in my job. So I was forced to look kind of into my brain, into different parts of, like, what have I done? What are the things that I can really, kind of say, hey, this is why I think I would be good in a leadership type of position. Because normally on my day-to-day job, that wasn't what I was focused with, right? I was focused with making sure I was doing the best thing for my customers, making sure that I'm working best with my colleagues, all of that kind of stuff. Make a long story short, my first management position was at Oracle. I was in it for about 2 years, and then I got a call from a friend of mine who I had worked with at Oracle, who was at a company called MuleSoft, and said, "Hey, we're starting a brand new federal practice here at MuleSoft. We're looking for somebody who's hungry, who's interested in building something, and really comes with kind of some leadership experience. Are you interested?" And this was about 4 years ago, almost to the date, actually.
Mm.
And I applied with them, interviewed, fell in love with the company for a number of different reasons, and then went on to become their kind of head of pre-sales for the federal practice, which was a practice of one at the time that I took
Hmm.
over,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then 6 months later, we were bought by Salesforce. Salesforce maintained us, and still to this day maintains us, as a separate business unit within their organization. So MuleSoft is its own business unit, and my role has grown over time. So I now cover not just federal, but public sector, which includes Canada public sector, higher ed, or higher education, nonprofit, state and local governments, and the federal government. All in all, it's been pretty awesome to see the kind of growth that we've done from one individual when I started to upwards of 35 now, over the last 4 years. But kind of in a nutshell, that's my journey, right? From pre-sales consulting into leadership.
So people in our industry are very familiar with what Oracle does,
Mhm.
and to some extent, Salesforce as well. But just for maybe for people that aren't as knowledgeable about tech and those types of companies, just to real briefly kind of explain what types of companies those are.
They are a large enterprise software companies. So at the end of the day, when you think of a company like, most people, for instance, know Microsoft Windows, right? And they're like, hey, this is something I use. It's on my computer. It's a very kind of user to user or business to consumer type of product. Companies like Salesforce and Oracle, they're really interested in underpinning the business that gets you the consumers, right? So in the case of Oracle, it was a lot of the back end information, database stores, all of that was Oracle driven. So you wouldn't be able to, a business would not be able to do its job without having some type of storage of data. That's what Oracle did. In the world of Salesforce, it's its power really comes in this, what they call this customer relationship management system, the ability to connect people with other individuals on this platform, and make sure that you're making sales, that you're taking inventory, that you're doing logistics management, all of that on their platform. So this is kind of in the world of enterprise sales. My company, MuleSoft, where we kind of come in is we're the connective tissue underneath that underpins a lot of those different systems. So how data gets from one end to another, how software and information is exchanged between those systems, that's what MuleSoft does. So we can take systems that are, cloud-based, if for those that are familiar with cloud-based, or ones that are on-premise, ones that are different types of applications, pulling all that stuff together. That's where MuleSoft comes in. So all of this is in that realm of enterprise software, which is how businesses do their day-to-day jobs, essentially.
Right, and also both Oracle and Salesforce are Silicon Valley companies, and they're for those that don't know, they're two of the largest software companies in the world. I mean, they're just absolutely massive software companies. Their clients or their customers are people like governments, et cetera. So it doesn't really get any bigger. I mean, there's a couple companies bigger like Microsoft, et cetera, that's in the same world, but you're basically at sort of the very, very large software company ecosystem.
Yeah, correct. I mean, I think last time I checked Salesforce's valuation, it's something insane, like $270 billion. And
Yeah.
I'm sure it's similar with, or if not more, with Oracle, right? So they're definitely, in terms of value and market capitalization, they're huge, huge companies. I think last I checked, also our Salesforce employee count was upwards of 70 or 80,000 now. So
Yeah.
a good chunk of the workforce employed with them.
So when it comes to, so one just kind of quick question I have. So I think I've told you this story before, but one of the things about what we're doing with Diamond Tree is we're profiling level 5 leaders. And one of the main characteristics of a level 5 leaders, they don't call attention to themselves, right? And the founder, I think he was the founder of Oracle, is pretty much the opposite of that. so just, and I don't know if I share this. Did I share the story where Mike and I did the conference in San Diego when we first moved there?
No, I don't think so.
So when I first moved to San Diego with our mutual friend Mike, we took a temp job because we just needed to get some work. So we went to a tape agency, and we basically were sort of these like badge scanners for the huge Oracle conference.
Oh,
And
okay.
so that was our first like introduction to work in San Diego. It was just like for like a 3-day gig where we were working at this thing. So anyways, at the time, I didn't really know anything about Oracle or anything like that, or who Larry Ellison was or anything. But he was treated like such a rock star. I mean, it was so, not only was he treated that way, he obviously was inviting that type of treatment. Like when he walked in, it was just this. So famously also, Oracle kind of grew to the size it did largely on the backs of super aggressive Salesforce. So he was a very aggressive kind of person who hired very aggressive sales teams and pushed them very hard. So as you kind of came into Oracle, and also that was a Silicon Valley culture. How did you feel that in the culture when you were there? Like, how did that actually express itself in the culture of the company?
Yeah, so it was definitely prominent in the culture of the company. And keep in mind, I work in a sales organization, so I was somewhat expecting some of that as it was, right?
Yeah.
Because sales organizations are often filled with, like, for lack of a better term, alpha males,
Yeah.
right? And they're all trying to get money and trying to, all this stuff. So what was interesting was the group that I joined initially was actually very collaborative, and that's what attracted me to it. Was hey, I've got a bunch of other sales engineers here who are very collaborative. They're teamwork oriented. In fact, I remember one of my first days there was some concept in one of the manuals I didn't understand, So my colleague said, hey, let's go over here. He took up, basically took time out of his day to put a whole whiteboarding session together for me. And that was kind of the culture that we had. And it was very collaborative. What happened over the ensuing 10 years was a lot more of that kind of, you know, that push down from the top in terms of, hey, we have to be aggressive. You have to go after every customer. You have to milk them for everything they're worth. It became more and more domineering in the organization, a lot more pervasive. It probably was there initially, but being a Silicon Valley based company and being on the East Coast, we were separated from that.
Right.
Over time, what happened was you could tell that was the profile of individual they were looking for. And a lot of the reason as to why I left, why it was, I don't want to say easy, but relatively easier for me to leave was because I didn't agree with the culture anymore.
Right.
I was like, this collaborative kind of everybody's in it to succeed together culture was completely eroded. And for me, I wanted to work somewhere. I didn't just believe in the tech, but I believed in the principles and the processes and the people. And there was a dichotomy at that point in my career where I was like, I just can't in good faith continue to work in an organization that I feel is really not treating its customers properly or its employees.
Yeah. And so when you saw that culture kind of shift come over and became more aggressive, and you felt like the more aggressive sales targets, et cetera, did you actually witness the sort of dissolving of the teamwork and people helping each other, and it became more competitive amongst the individuals in the organization?
It did, and it didn't just in terms of the people who were already there, because we remember that culture, right? But it was the new
Yeah.
people that were being brought in. And
Right.
again, everybody that comes in new wants to make an impact. When they
Right.
see that the only way they can make that impact is by being that aggressive, kind of domineering person, then that's what that aspect of themselves they're gonna put out there, right?
Right.
So again, not to say that people were bad or anything like that. It was just it fostered this kind of like, hey, in order to succeed, you've got to be in it for yourself. And that was just not something I was interested in promoting.
Yeah. So that, that's actually a theme I return to a lot, which is people find themselves in one or more, usually more than one group. And there's just a very natural human tendency to try to gain status and rise in that group. And so people just adapt whatever the value system is, adopt whatever the value system is that helps them rise in that group. And sometimes they don't even think through, are these my values or not my values? And I mean, I just see this over and over and over again, where people they get in a competitive environment. They're like, okay, this is what it takes to succeed here. And those values they just adopt them, just because what becomes overwhelming is survival and advancement, not so much reflection of, hey, are these actually my values?
You're 100% spot on, Pete. And one of the things that I don't think I gave enough credence to when I first became a leader was what kind of a role we as leaders play in shaping the culture.
Right.
Right. And I started to see that at Oracle. At Oracle, when I became a leader, when I first made that jump from individual contributor to leader, right, I realized pretty quickly that this team is looking up to me.
Yeah.
And so they're looking to me not just for guidance, right, but for companionship, for understanding, for career development and growth. And I realized pretty early on that I may have the ability to shape culture here, even if it's just on my little team. Right. And that was something I didn't necessarily think about. I think about a lot now, but as I was getting into the role, it wasn't something I necessarily thought about. I was really more concerned about resource management. Like, hey, am I going to be able to manage all the requests that are coming from sales and manage this and manage that? But the aspect of the job that was really kind of, I hadn't thought through, was the building of a culture. And pretty early on, I realized that has to be something intentional. It can't be something you just leave by the wayside, because then what happens is that domineering culture is going to seep itself in. You've got to actively work against it.
So I want to explore that a little bit, but first I want to ask you, because I was in a similar situation in that I wanted to kind of create a culture within a group where the culture might have been different than in the larger organization. And I think sometimes as leaders, we have to be careful about that, because we only have so much time and energy, and we got to decide where we're going to devote that, So my question for you is, let's say you even knew that more than you did at the time, and you said, hey, from day one here at Oracle, I'm going to instill this culture. Would you been able to long-term succeed if the overall organization's culture was different than what you were trying to instill? How would you think through that?
My personal opinion is it's very difficult.
Yeah,
it's very difficult to do that. At an established organization like Oracle, right? It's been around for 30 plus years and has that. very difficult. You can change it probably within your team, but long term, expecting that to kind of, venture out into the rest of the organization, I think is very tough. Again, this is my personal opinion. Part of the reason I took the job at MuleSoft was because it was small enough where I felt that I can start to make that impact and have that multiplier effect,
Yeah.
right? Because it wasn't established.
Right.
And that's something that I've taken very like kind of near and dear to my heart as we've grown out this team and this organization, is that I'm not just growing out people, it's the culture of the organization. I've got to be intentional. We've got to be, what Dan Coyle, I think, mentions in his book, the culture code. He's like, you have to be vulnerable, you've got to build psychological safety, and you have to have a shared purpose. And if you do those three things right, this culture is something that's very intentional for you to build, right? Otherwise, I think, again, the dominating culture around you is going to kind of seep in, and that will begin to take its shape.
Yeah. And also it's kind of like you're doing worthy work in an organization that's not worthy of it at some point. At some point when things are so different that you're killing yourself to, kind of swim upstream, that, when I see good leaders that are really, that care and are in maybe some organizations that don't have the same exact values they do, then part of me is like, hey, no organization is perfect. So you have to make the determination if this is a close enough fit. But if it's not, like, life's too short,
Yeah.
don't spend your time making something healthy for an organization that has values that you don't agree with.
Yeah, the values piece, Pete, is the most important part.
Yeah.
Because I think there was a time, in at least I'll say my parents' generation, where you just kind of stuck to your job. You did your job, you did it, and you had to, right? You needed a paycheck. In my parents' case, they were immigrants. There was very much like, hey, we need this stability, right? I think increasingly, especially in this ever globalizing world that we live in, right? People for the long term need to be linked to an organization that where their values are in sync. Otherwise, it's just over time, you will see the dichotomy will become so great that I'm not going to be motivated to do my job. I'm not going to be motivated to continue to work at this organization like that.
Yeah. So, and in the case of MuleSoft, you're talking about, hey, this is small, and part of you is like, hey, I can help shape this culture because the cement is still wet. But also, you had to feel as though the people that were recruiting you and maybe the leadership of the organization were more in sync with what your kind of values were, right?
100%. I mean, it was I can't even explain to you what a stark difference it was, coming from the Oracle kind of everybody's in it for themselves and hell or high water, we're going to make this sale, into we really promote on stage the people behind the scenes that are allowing the other people to be successful. And I was like, wow, this is, you don't see that too much in organizations.
Right.
And frankly, you might now. I think there's more of that kind of culture seeping into Silicon Valley types of organizations. But at MuleSoft, that was a breath of fresh air. It was like, yeah, you know what? I can do my job and just get rewarded by the fact that everybody else is seeing the success and they're seeing it. And my success is not measured necessarily by me, but by how well the team is doing and how everyone is kind of successful together. One of my first, I guess, after my first fiscal year at MuleSoft, I kind of gave a pep talk to my team, right? And I said, guys, my goal for next year is not just to have one of you walk across stage at our annual meetup, but is to have all of you walk across there, even if I'm not there. And even if I'm not the one on stage, nothing would make me happier than to see all of you get that success that I know you're so worthy of here. Right. I think it's just and I believe that it wasn't just, it wasn't just saying it. I even to my core, I still believe it to this day. Like, I love seeing the progression and growth in individuals as they move on, move up, even if it's not within MuleSoft. Whereas at an organization like again, not to dog on Oracle, but at Oracle,
it's all right. We can do it. they're in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, it was interesting because every time an SC at Oracle was looking at a new job, the manager would see it as an affront on themselves. Like, oh, how could you leave working for me? And I was like, dude, this person is growing. We should be encouraging them. I mean, it got to a point where I was actually encouraging my own SCs who I saw promise in, like, hey, you should look at a Google or another Silicon Valley, look at somewhere else that might be able to better harness your talents, because for your own growth, that's what's important. And what you do in that process, Pete, is unbeknownst to you in a lot of cases, you build loyalty. People will then see you as, hey, this is somebody who I can take them on as a mentor long after my job here is done, right? And I can turn to them for solid advice. And I've had those early employees that I've had them turn to me, Shad, I've got a job decision to make. Can you help me talk through this a little bit, right? Even though they're not working for me, they're not working at, they're just, we want to I think the best leaders are those that inspire that in others, right?
Right.
And really try to get them to see like, hey, we're greater than the sum of our parts, right? If
Right.
we can all just kind of work together.